Hey everyone, FinTech here. Today to talk about two very similar cybersecurity companies for my portfolio, SentinelOne and Crowdstrike. Both companies offer next-generation AI-powered security, both companies are rapidly grabbing new market share, and both companies are growing at over 70% per year, nearly doubling in size. Crowdstrike in particular has been a staple of my portfolio for a while now, returning over 100% per year since it IPOed in 2019. In this video, I will review what each company does, talk about how the numbers show each company is performing, and review what in my eyes makes the two companies fundamentally different. Lastly, I'll let you know which stock I personally am picking to invest in. But to really understand each company, you first need to understand how they got to where they are today. With SentinelOne valued at over $17 billion, up from just under $9 billion when it IPO'd in June 2021, and Crowdstrike valued at over $62 billion, up more than 4 times from when they IPO'd back in June of 2019. There must be some backstory to their current success. Let's start with Crowdstrike. Crowdstrike was founded in 2011 by current CEO George Kurtz, along with 2 co-founders, Dmitry Alperovich and Greg Marston. They launched their first product, Crowdstrike Falcon, in 2013, with a focus on security threat intelligence. Today, Crowdstrike Falcon endpoint protection allows companies to monitor endpoints in a cloud-native way that is bolstered by AI. An endpoint is essentially anywhere where one computer system needs to connect to another. By defending these endpoints, a security company can ensure that no outside actors can get into the system. Falcon platform is now a full security suite, all packaged together in a cloud-native way that allows it to essentially cover any scale, using Crowdstrike's extremely advanced threat graph to power their detection capabilities. Their Falcon product has received the highest possible score in a Forrester report on external threat intelligence tools, and the company's products continue to receive the highest rating from Forrester in endpoint protection and from Gartner reports on their customer reviews. Just 1 year after launching Falcon in May of 2014, Crowdstrike's reports assisted the United States Department of Justice in charging 5 military hackers for economic cyber espionage against the United States corporations. In 2015, they uncovered evidence implicating the government of North Korea in hacking Sony Pictures and demonstrated how the attack was carried out, further bolstering their public profile. They continue to be at the forefront of cybersecurity, and in June of 2019, Crowdstrike IPO'd to the public at a price of $34 a share. By the following Wednesday, shares were trading at $67 a share, giving them a valuation of over $10 billion. They continued to grow rapidly, and their stock received another boost in 2020 after the SolarWinds breach, one of the largest software security breaches of all time. That breach involved a network monitoring software company, SolarWinds, whose software was infected with malware, possibly from the Russian government, infecting corporations ranging from Microsoft to the Treasury Department to the US Department of Defense. While other security companies were vulnerable to this attack, hackers attempted and failed to get into any of the systems protected by Crowdstrike. In fact, after the hack, SolarWinds themselves deployed Falcon endpoint protection at their company. Today, Crowdstrike is kind of the undisputed king of next-gen AI-powered cybersecurity for the cloud, and their rich valuation as a company shows it. But there's a new competitor who offers very similar products to Crowdstrike, and one that also has a leg up on other traditional security companies, SentinelOne. SentinelOne was founded actually around the same time as Crowdstrike, back in 2013, by their current CEO Tomer Weingarten, along with 2 co-founders, Almog Cohen and Udi Shamir. SentinelOne has not had quite the same high-profile past as Crowdstrike. In fact, the only news story I could find around the company before 2019 were all related to how much money they were raising. Now, this isn't really fair to SentinelOne because they actually have a lot in common with Crowdstrike. They similarly use a patented AI heuristics model to monitor computers, Internet of Things devices, and cloud workloads for security breaches. And while they are not cloud native in quite the same way as Crowdstrike, they try to sell this as an upside, saying they are not reliant on the cloud and can run their agent on a local endpoint if needed. Now, normally I would prefer a company to be cloud native because I think it gives them a leg up on protecting cloud workloads. But SentinelOne has proven the efficacy of their software in the past. During the SolarWinds breach that I mentioned earlier, SentinelOne's system actually also recognized the attack happening and prevented their protected systems from being breached. And while they didn't get quite the same press coverage as Crowdstrike, Their customers were definitely happy that they picked them over some legacy security company. So is CrowdStrike's only advantage the fact that they have had a higher profile past, which leads them to nabbing larger customers? Well, maybe, but let's now do a comparison of the two companies' products. So CrowdStrike has the greater overall suite of products, which you would probably expect from a much larger company. From threat intelligence to endpoint security to identity protection to their new line of fully managed security in the cloud, meaning companies no longer need full security teams. CrowdStrike can handle all of that as a service. SentinelOne, meanwhile, has a much smaller array of products, including endpoint protection, data management, cloud security, and XDR, which is extended detection and response across many layers of security, including emails, endpoints, servers, and the cloud. What's interesting is if you look at SentinelOne's website, one of the first links they promote is an entire page calling out why you should use SentinelOne over CrowdStrike. They talk about how in the MITRE attack evaluation, CrowdStrike had 62 misses, delays, or configuration changes, which SentinelOne did not have. MITRE is basically a standard base of real-world attacks and techniques to access systems that security products can then be tested against. SentinelOne also points out that they are the platform that had the most analytical detections of any platform for 2 years running, becoming the first endpoint detection and response platform to deliver 100% visibility on MITRE without the misses that CrowdStrike had. But on the flip side, CrowdStrike also has an entire section on their site talking about why you should use CrowdStrike over SentinelOne. In fact, one of the points that they call out is that SentinelOne only catches 100% of issues because they also have a much higher amount of false positives. In fact, they have so many more false positives that many customers have to use a separate product called Vigilance just to triage the massive amounts of alerts they're getting and to sort out the actual issues from false alarms. Both websites list out a bunch of reasons why one platform is better than the other. CrowdStrike is slow. SentinelOne is more cumbersome. CrowdStrike requires more manual interventions. SentinelOne is configuration intensive. Both sites even look the same, with a chat icon in the bottom, which when you click on it, also trash talks the competition. So without testing each product or actually being in the security space, unfortunately reading these opposing claims doesn't do me all that much good. So let's instead look at what some actual experts think of the two products. First off, we can look at Forrester. Forrester rates CrowdStrike as a leader in endpoint security software as a service, ahead of any other company in terms of both their future strategy on the x-axis and current offerings on the y-axis. SentinelOne falls back into the strong performers section. Next, looking at Gartner. In an analysis of customer reviews, Gartner rates CrowdStrike a tiny bit higher than SentinelOne, but in a few key areas such as timeliness of support and flexibility of pricing, they didn't have any data for SentinelOne. And that kind of summarizes my own impression of SentinelOne's products. We have this new challenger with potentially very impressive products, but they just don't have the same proven track record as CrowdStrike. Meanwhile, with CrowdStrike, we know that they have had the best products in the world for a few years now, and they seem to have a rock-solid strategy going forward. Just as an example of the early mover advantage that CrowdStrike has, they recently launched Falcon Complete for GovCloud, a US FedRAMP compliant program. Achieving FedRAMP means that public sector organizations can now easily choose to use CrowdStrike's products as one of only 235 software services that are authorized in the FedRAMP marketplace. So even if SentinelOne's products were theoretically undeniably better than CrowdStrike's, that's a moat that they can't overcome in the short term. But again, unless you're a security person, you're probably not going to be able to get to a 100% confidence level on whose products are actually better. But luckily for us, we can always fall back on the company's numbers. Customer reviews are nice, but the best review is a customer actually spending money on your platform. So let's compare the last two earnings reports of each company to see who is winning in this area. So starting off with SentinelOne. We're going to be looking at the only earnings we have, which were for Q1 2022 that they reported back in April before they IPOed. At that time, they had 4,700 customers, up from 2,700 in April 2020, or up 74% year over year. They also had $37.4 million in revenue for the 3 months ending April 30th, 2021. Up 108% from the previous year. We can compare that to CrowdStrike, who now has over 13,000 subscription customers, up 81% year over year. So despite having a larger base of customers to start with, CrowdStrike also grew a greater overall percentage of customers than SentinelOne. They now have $1.34 billion in annual recurring revenue, up 70% year over year. So in percentage terms, that growth is a little bit slower than SentinelOne, but in terms of raw numbers, CrowdStrike is still growing around 10 times faster than SentinelOne in terms of revenue. Turning now to profitability. SentinelOne currently has a pretty negative operating margin of negative 127%. This is a little concerning because let's say SentinelOne doubles their revenue next year and they manage to use economies of scale to only increase their operating expenses a little bit, maybe 50%. Well, even though their margins are improving, they will go from losing $127 million on their almost $100 million in revenue to losing over $200 million on their now $200 million in revenue. While eventually they might be able to scale their way out of this margin hole, remember the company is only worth $17 billion and they are burning hundreds of millions every year that they operate. This means that they will probably need to issue more stock shares to make up for that shortfall at some point in the future, putting downward pressure on the share price. Compare that then to CrowdStrike, who has much higher gross margins that are allowing them to have positive operating margin around 20 to 22% and a free cash flow margin of over 30%. So even though they're growing at 70% per year, they're still managing to throw off some serious cash flow. So that initial numbers comparison obviously makes CrowdStrike look better, but to be fair, one of the problems with comparing these two stocks is that CrowdStrike is already so much larger and farther along in their profitability journey. But if we look back at CrowdStrike when they were only making $100 million per year, back in July of 2019, we can get a more fair comparison between the two companies. Back in 2019, CrowdStrike was valued $2 billion lower at their IPO than SentinelOne. After all, SentinelOne was actually the highest valued cybersecurity IPO ever. But in 2019, CrowdStrike was growing at around the same rate that SentinelOne is right now, at 103% year over year. Yet at the same time, CrowdStrike's gross margins were 72% compared to SentinelOne's current gross margins of 53%. And while CrowdStrike was also losing money back then, it wasn't nearly as fast as SentinelOne is right now. So we have a few things to consider. In some ways, SentinelOne looks similar to CrowdStrike from 2 years ago. After all, they are growing at a similar rate off of around the same base of revenue, albeit with much worse margins. Well, in the last 2 years, we saw CrowdStrike 4x in price. So even if SentinelOne isn't quite as good of a company, might it still do well in the long term? So here are my thoughts overall. CrowdStrike is a far superior company to SentinelOne. Better products, better business model, and they have a first mover advantage. Remember, we're dealing with AI-based companies here, which means that the more data you have, the better your AI models are going to be. This creates a flywheel effect, where getting more customers generates more data, which feeds into a better product leading to more customers. CrowdStrike is much farther along in this positive feedback loop than SentinelOne, and honestly, I don't think they can catch up. But I am not saying SentinelOne is a bad investment. The security market is so large, with a total addressable market potentially topping $100 billion annually, and it's also so outdated that even if CrowdStrike beats SentinelOne on every contract that they both compete for, SentinelOne still has room to grow by taking business from legacy security providers. I think they're offering the right kind of product. I just don't think that they're going to be outcompeting CrowdStrike in the next 3 to 5 years. Now, to be clear, I have no idea what SentinelOne will report next quarter or the quarter after that. The stock might still do well if they beat their guidance estimates and raise guidance. But if I have to make a choice between putting $1,000 into SentinelOne or $1,000 into CrowdStrike, it's hard for me not to pick CrowdStrike every time. But let me know in the comments what your opinion on these two companies is, or if you have experience using either product. Also, if you liked this video, I'm trying to hit my goal of reaching 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, but to do that, I'll need help from the 75% of you who aren't subscribed. So if you got value from this, please just like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.